Burge, the technical host for today's Print Club of New York webinar. I would like to welcome you all and give you a quick introduction to this format. This is a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom meeting, which means that everyone in the audience will stay on mute with your videos off. This gives everyone a sense of privacy and helps to prevent any distraction to the speakers. Please note that this lecture is being recorded and will be posted on the Print Club's YouTube channel. We will be sharing an email to the entire membership when the video is posted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the Q&A box on the lower center of your screen. We encourage you to write the questions as you think of them so that the speakers can, or so that Luther can immediately begin answering your questions after the talk. You can submit questions anonymously or with your name attached. Please just check the Post Anonymously button if you would like to do so. Thank you all for attending, and I am now handing the microphone over to Kimberly Henriksen, the president of the Print Club of New York.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome everyone. For those of you who are new members or guests, my name is Kimberly Henriksen. I am president of the Print Club of New York and happy to have you joining us tonight for our annual Artists Talk. This is our first virtual event, and we are excited to be making our programming more accessible by holding this event online, while our ability to hold in-person gatherings is limited. We will also be posting this video to our website for anyone who could not attend live or wishes to view it again. This evening's talk accompanies the release of our annual presentation print issued to members for the 2020 to 2021 membership year and is our 29th annual print. This year's artist is Victoria Burge, and we are grateful for her willingness to create a print for our club. The annual print is one of the many benefits of membership in the Print Club, which encourages print collectors and print enthusiasts to continue learning about both modern and historic printmaking and print artists through lectures, exhibition tours, panel discussions, and on-site visits to print shops, galleries, and artist studios. If you are not a member and are curious about membership, you can find us online at www.printclubofnewyork.org. Moving ahead with tonight's program, I would like to express my sincerest appreciation to Allison Tolman, Chair of the Print Selection Committee, as well as the members of the committee, for their diligent work in identifying an artist each year, during which they manage the communications and logistics with the artist in order to see the project through, while ensuring that we continue to invite some of the most talented and thoughtful artists to be a part of our program. This year is no exception. I'm very much looking forward to learning more about the inspiration behind and production of this year's print from both the artist and the master printer, who we happen to also have on hand this evening. Without further delay, I would like to pass the meeting over to Allison, who will introduce this year's print.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Allison Tolman, the chair of the Print Selection Committee. This year, well, we were very lucky that the presentation print had been selected last year, given the challenges. And Victoria Burge was a delight to work with. I met her with co-chair Deb Cheney, and it was really a treat to hear her explain her work. Due to the challenges of the pandemic, Victoria, who was living in Philadelphia, has relocated to New Hampshire, and she was quite worried about internet connectivity. So she chose to present her remarks for tonight's meeting in a recording, which we will hear shortly. And directly after the video of her remarks, Master Printer Luther Davis will tell us all about how the print came into being. So please enjoy Victoria Burge via video.
Commission print. Hi, I'm Victoria Burge. I'm recording this from my studio in southern New Hampshire, and I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to speak a little bit about Night Architecture, the Print Club's 2020 commission print. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to thank the Print Club for offering me this really wonderful project. And Also to thank Powerhouse Arts in Brooklyn for collaborating with me and printing all 225 prints within the edition. So I've put together a slideshow presentation. It's a little over 15 minutes, and it talks about two different series of work that I've been investigating for the last 10 years or so. One is a series of light and maps, and the other is a more recent investigation into coded notations, those typically used in textile design. And these two series come together to inform the imagery of your print, Night Architecture. So I have really enjoyed putting together the talk, and I very much hope you enjoy your print, and I will begin. In 2011, when I lived in Philadelphia, I began a daily practice of recording light reflections on the Schuylkill River, which is one of the main rivers that runs through downtown. Every day for several months, I kept both a visual and written diary of the river's topographic surface. Through photographic note-taking, I charted how certain conditions, like wind, weather, my location, or the time of day, influence the water's interaction with light. From this collection of information, a series of work in a variety of media developed, each piece informing the next in an attempt to map the inherently unstable and fleeting qualities of light on water. Throughout this study, I've thought about how light exists simultaneously as both a negative and a positive space, how light illuminates and obscures in its brightness, and how light creates the illusion of surface but leaves no physical impression. Removing color from my photographic notes and then darkening the photographs until the surrounding environment disappears allows the points of light that I seek to rise to the surface. What one is left with are various constellations or maps of light, and it's from here that I translate the information into drawings, sculpture, and printed editions. This is an example of a relief print from 2012 titled Night Pixel. So the white points that you see in the image are the white of the paper, and they're raised up on the surface like braille. The surrounding environment is black ink. The work becomes a graphic trace of a specific transient moment. And for me, it also becomes the memory or a record of a place. This is a triptych created with Aspinwall Editions in New York in 2015, named Light Study. These prints reflect an interest in the topographical possibilities of both paper and print. Unlike light that leaves no impression on the surface of the water, these prints leave a deep impression on the paper's surface. And here's an example of one of the embossed forms, so you can really see the sculptural quality of the embossment. These works utilize the raking light of the room to activate the forms, so depending on where you're standing or how the work is lit will determine how much of the piece you see. This is an example of one of my laser-cut acrylic printing plates that generate these embossed forms. And this is an example of an intaglio printing plate, different from the laser-cut plexiglass acrylic ones in that this plate was etched and then drilled by hand, so it's just a much more labor-intensive process. What I learned from working with these printing matrices is that the matrix not only generates printed editions, but can stand alone as a sculptural object, an object that has the ability to cast light and shadow. So it was at this time that I started to think about using light not only as subject matter, but as a medium. So I started to experiment with using paper as a matrix in order to create impressions of light. Paper has this wonderful fluid mobility. So depending on how you manipulate it, it can resemble the movements of water or weather or a pulsing atmosphere. I made several works in this series, but I'll show just this one. It's a photographic still of an untitled kinetic sculpture here on the screen that I created for a solo exhibition at the Print Center in Philly in 2016. And I put it together using a motor, hand-pierced carbon paper, and a light source. The viewer approached this sculpture by peering through a small cutout window within a wall, as if looking through a microscope or a telescope. And this is what the viewer would see when they looked through the window. Most of my drawings from this period, which ranged from about 2008 to 2018, use printed ephemera, mostly maps from the 19th and early 20th century. Night Architecture, the edition I made for the Print Club, uses a page from a beautiful old atlas of stars called the Atlas Eclipticalis, and I'll come back to this book a little bit later in my talk. Often I begin these drawn pieces on found maps using a magnifying lens and a small brush, telescoping in, opaquing certain areas of information with washes of black ink or black gesso. This process of building through erasure is similar to how I remove the background environment from my photographs when recording light. And then I telescope out in order to piece the work together so the micro kind of speaks to the macro. This image here is titled Coastline. It's 5 by 11 feet and is made up of 15 pages from an oversized 1915 Atlas of the World. And I also exhibited this at the Print Center in 2016. And here I am working on it from another view. I often work directly on the floor. It's actually a really great way to get close to the work, especially when working on such a large scale. And there's another map drawing above me. Again, I'm thinking about the connectivity of light and terrain. This is a detail of Coastline. I use sea salt in my ink to create those reticulated washes seen here on the screen to mimic atmosphere or the topographic swirling action of light and water in the sea. And in doing so, I explore the opacities and the depths of the color black and its inescapable relationship with light. And here's the piece on the wall in the gallery, all put together. Coastline, like many of my pieces from this series, and also recent works like Night Architecture, the print that you all have, aims to present varying perspectives, looking up at a night full of constellations, looking down from high above at a night-lit landscape, looking across a glowing ocean of light from the edge of a coastline, balancing terrestrial and celestial cartographies in delicate opposition. To transition from my study of light to my study of notations, I'll begin with this photograph of a spectrum of stars taken at a Harvard observatory in Peru in 1893. Within this photograph, the white numbers next to each streak of light serve as a classification system. They are a record of each star's brightness based on its temperature. This photograph is found on the cover of a lesson plan for astronomy students to learn how to identify and interpret starlight. I think this is a good image, a good example of a coded notation, and how a coded notation has several attributes as a visual diagram. It's used as a form of documentation. It's a record of information. It's used as an instructional blueprint, and I think you can argue that the image has its own aesthetic value even without its given scientific context. So a coded visual diagram offers several opportunities for translation by the viewer. So for the past couple of years, I've been looking at systems of notation and how they range graphically from numbers to letters to abstract symbols, and the endless formats that notations can take, such as musical scores, mathematical equations, puzzle solutions, and most specifically to my recent work and to this talk, the Weaver's draft notation. And this is an example here on the screen of a coded notation used in weaving. This inquiry of diagrammatic notation began in 2017 when I was a studio apprentice at the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia. Here I learned how to screen print on a large scale and how to repeat a pattern. And this is an example of 8 yards of fabric that I printed there. The image on the left is the first step in the process where we printed black along the length of the yardage. And then we printed my image on top of that black layer. The image was again based on a scattering of light. And then the image on the right, you see as the last step in the process using special fabric inks to add hand color. And here's a detail of the final design. It was also at the fabric workshop that I was first introduced to the codes of textile design, and specifically the draft notation, an instructional diagram used in weaving. I was intrigued by the role of notation as an equation of utility and the organizational beauty of patterns created within the structure of a grid. So 2 years later, in 2019, I was a fellow at the Joseph and Ani Albers Foundation in Bethany, Connecticut. This is an image here of my studio where I worked, but I actually spent the majority of my residency in the foundation's library, collecting patterns and approaches to generating pattern found in their really extensive archive. In my studio practice, and while I was at Albers, I worked with simple materials and everyday objects, such as found children's blocks, puzzle pieces, schoolhouse slates, and antique graph paper for my drawing surfaces. So I was using materials that had a history of being handled already inside of them, so the works had this pre-existing tactile quality. This is a small sculptural piece here on the screen that they're blocks that I painted and drew on most of the sides, and I've shown this piece in many iterations, and within each combination reveals a different pattern. This is another example of a small sculptural piece within a larger series that utilizes light again as a medium and simple shapes to practice building pattern. And with these forms, I'm thinking about how negative spaces, such as shadow, become the active spaces. So I'll just show 2 examples of drawings from this series. On the right is a drawing called Curved Twill, and here I'm following a coded prompt of a particular draft notation. That notation is there on the left. And I'm investigating what is lost and what is gained in the translation of a code typically used in weaving to a code now being used in a new media, in this case in drawing. In day weave, this image here, I'm using graph paper as my only structural constraint, allowing for more intuitive drawing. So I'm sort of looking to see where each drawn line will lead me in generating a pattern. So while I was at the Albers Foundation, I began working on a project with Dudonné Paper Mill in Brooklyn, New York. I had never worked with handmade paper before, and the haptic quality of the process seemed in good timing with the research and the work I was doing at the Albers Foundation. So at Dudonné, we created an edition of 10 unique pairs of hand-pulled paper using the constraint of a square grid composed of circles to develop the imagery. So each individual work contains a composition of circles from this laser cut grid. And here in this image, you can see Tatiana on the right. She's one of the master paper makers at Dudonné, laying down the stencil onto a freshly pressed sheet of abaca and linen fiber. And here I am using an eyedropper and paper pulp paint to drop into certain areas of the stencil to create different combinations of circles. So within the edition, the circles are made of either black or white paper pulp paint, pressed into a backing sheet of either black or unpigmented abaca and linen fibers, so it's paper on paper. Here's another image, a couple of images of the process where we're lifting up the stencil. On some pieces, the circles remain single stitches in space. On others, a collaboration of circles unite to form structured patterns. When the edition was flattened and dried, I made a unique drawing on top of each image using a combination of pencil, graphite, and opaque ink. And here on the screen is an example of a pair from the edition. And here's another pair. Order and seriality in these pattern sequences are combined with irregularities to convey the handmade. This palpable mark making of both my hand and the medium reference the tactile utilitarian source material from which I work. At the same time I was working with Dudene, I began my project with Powerhouse Arts to create the commissioned print for the Print Club of New York. So I'll conclude my talk with this project. Luther Davis, who was one of the master printers on the project, will speak about the process of making the print. So I'll just talk a little bit about how I generated the imagery. And I'm sure Luther will mention this UV light machine pictured here with Dennis, another master printer on the project, on the left, pulling my print out of the machine once the light had cured the ink. Night Architecture is a silkscreen print that unites my previous explorations of light mapping and celestial cartographies with my more recent research into the repeated patterns and coded notations used in textile design. The preliminary drawing for Night Architecture is based directly on top of a page from the Atlas Eclipticalis, a codex of star charts created by a Czech astronomer in the 1950s. Each page of this atlas is a different section of the sky, and it's quite a large book. It measures about 2 feet high by 1.5 feet wide. So for the print Night Architecture, I used a page from this atlas. The map served as an inner infrastructure, sort of a scaffold for the line work to build upon, where each point of light became a graphic anchor. Similar to how I remove the color from my photographs of light on water, I begin by removing the color from the page until the points of light I seek rise to the surface. I then draw on top of a digital printout of the altered page with white pencil and sometimes also white ink or white acrylic. Unlike my earlier works that use washes of black ink, I've recently begun to use opaque black backgrounds to achieve more architectural geometric spaces, so different from topographic or atmospheric ones. Night Architecture combines the randomness of scattered light with a sense of order, grounded by the architectural structure of the grid. Built on the concept of the warp and weft, the vertical and horizontal axes used in weaving, my hand moved from left to right across the page as I drew the image and then reversed, just as a shuttle moves back and forth across a loom from left to right and then right to left. Each line's trajectory calls to mind a ray of light in the night sky, a flicker of light on a river's surface, or a delicate strand of thread. Thank you.
Well, wow. I'm Luther Davis. I'm Master Printer Director of Powerhouse Arts. And thank you for having me. And that was a pretty amazing video from Victoria. There's a lot of content in there that I didn't know. So I'm learning a lot of this for the first time as well. Working with Victoria was a great experience, and I'm so happy that I was part of this project. So thank you for the print club for making this possible. One thing I would like to say is that this is a silkscreen print that utilizes very fine detail that is usually reserved for etching, and also utilizes some pretty amazing new technologies as far as ink. Victoria mentioned we used a light oven to cure ink. So we are printing with an ink in this piece, printing with an ink formulated for printing Braille. And so if you have your print in front of you, I encourage you to touch it. We all did many, many times. And if you touch it, there is a slight relief to the ink. So Victoria submitted her drawing to us and talked about how she would like to proceed, what she could do with silkscreen that she couldn't do with any of the other processes that she mentioned. She's done them all. She's done litho, etching, paper making, and now silkscreen. And so we propose doing this Braille ink, an ink that would have a slight raise to it. And so what you see as you look at your print is a field of black with a very delicate white line printed on it, and then a dot printed on top of that that is in slight relief. But because of the way that printing works, in order to get a relief quality with ink, you have to hit it many, many times. You have to print on top of it. So what you're looking at is sort of a candle of ink. So if you touch it, and if you can imagine that we had to print on those dots in registration, mind you, over and over again to get a little tiny bit of relief, a little deposit of ink. Now, one of the beautiful things about printing is that anything can happen, and that mistakes and hand marks and things like that, there were no rooms for mistakes in Victoria's print. Every single little pinhole of light would create a constellation that wasn't supposed to be there. So we had to be very, very precise on where the ink went on every single print, right? So you all have prints, I hope, that are identical, and there's not a star in the sky that shouldn't be there. So this was part of the process that we went with Victoria. And we also did this semi-remotely. So we would send proofs to her, she would write comments on them, we would re-edition, and it got down to the point where the lines that you see in her print are so fine that we had to send out her work to another print shop to get films, real photographic films made. So Peter Crudy Editions made films that we then exposed on our screen because he had an archaic film output device that we didn't have. So this is truly a collaboration between Dennis Hirosik, who's the master printer printing all the prints, the 4 other master printers who are moving the prints around and drying them, and then myself and Victoria trying to work with other shops to get all the little fine details photographically you see in the print. I hope that you have questions about the still screen process. Later on, I'm happy to explain that ad nauseum if you wish. I'd also like to mention that this is our second print with the print club. And 2 years ago, I believe it was, we printed with Amzie Emmons as an addition as well. So I think that's about all I have. If you have any questions, please.
Luther, this is
Yes.
Allison, and I'm going to jump in because we have not received the print yet.
Okay.
We always wait until after the presentation print talk. So
okay, good to know.
I'm going to be extremely excited now that you're giving them all of this talk about Braille and relief. And I, for one, I would love if you, because you are a master printer, if you would tell us about the silkscreen process.
I would love to. So the silkscreen process is a stencil process. So it's a right reading process. If you're familiar with the print process, etchers and lithographers and relief, they work in reverse, in a mirror image. So if they're making words, they have to make the words backwards. Silkscreen is a positive process. So we create an image on film, typically drawing it or printing it out with a computer, or in this case, using photography on film. And then we expose it to a screen that's coated with a photosensitive emulsion. And what happens is we develop that with water, and if you can imagine a screen, it's silkscreen. Silkscreen also has, silkscreen is the traditional name, serigraphy is the art name for it, and screen printing is the industrial name. So it's a screen. And in Victoria's print, we used a mesh that was 420 threads per inch. So that's 420 very delicate threads with 420 very tiny holes. And that determines this very precise detail that we were printing on Victoria's print. So that, I mean, that's finer than the sheets that I have on my bed. And so if you imagine little tiny holes that are allowing ink to go through the screen. So we selectively determine what that matrix is going to be, that stencil is going to be, how it's going to be, what holes are going to be open and what holes are going to be closed by exposing an image onto it. And this is a traditional process that's been around for a long time. And so the screen is going up and down, and we're with a squeegee pushing ink through the screen. And so what I would like to, when you get your print, and Victoria showed you pictures of it, you'll see very thin lines with little dots that are printed on it and it's very subtle, but a lot of Victoria's imagination went into how this is built up. Very subtle differences in the white of the lines versus the white of little dots versus the white of big dots. And it's a whole cosmos that's in a small package. So in order to get the brightest stars in the sky, if you will, we had to print over and over again on those dots and land precisely, printing ink through a screen precisely on every single dot to build up a shallow relief. And it's very subtle. If you touch it, you'll definitely feel it. And I hope you do touch your own prints. But what that meant is that we had to land exactly on these prints with the squeegee and ink over and over again. And so in order to make Victoria's print, what was interesting was we're printing with an ink that is dried with light and only with light. It doesn't evaporate. It doesn't require heat. Any little defect in the screen became a star in the constellation. And so our very first print, where we demoed the possibilities of her idea, we had lots of what we call pinholes, little stars. And she went through and circled every single star. This is, she's so on top of her image, every little star that shouldn't be there. And so we then went and edited out all of the stars that shouldn't be there on the screen by painting in the screen meticulously, little tiny dots. And it took a long time, and we reproofed it, and she loved it. And then someone accidentally reclaimed that screen in our shop and took the image off. And so we had to do the whole thing again. And Dennis, who was featured in that picture, was just beside himself because he had spent hours hand painting the screen to match Victoria's comments. And I have, yes, please.
We have one question from somebody who would like to get Dennis's name. This is our newsletter editor, and where the print was sent for the photographic step mentioned.
Oh, so Peter Crudy Editions. He's a master printer of letterpress and books, and he has I would say he has an 80s era computer that he's kept alive just to output film like this. So Peter Crudy Editions. Dennis Hirosik, don't embarrass myself on camera forever, but you can see on our website our full print team, but it's HREHOWSKI.
Okay, we will double check you. We also have another question from a printmaker who would like to know, would flocking have been a possibility for creating the raised dots? Just wondering.
That's an interesting idea. The flocking, you'll see that these dots are very small. And so there wouldn't have been much ink to hold on flocking.
Can you tell us what flocking is also for those of us who are not printmakers?
Flocking is most typical flocking is as you would encounter on a velveteen rabbit. So a plastic rabbit that has hairs, or a Muppet. So hairs that stand perfectly, or a psychedelic flock poster, black light poster from the 60s would have a black velvet surface on it. Yep. That is what we think of as flocking. We now use that term more broadly, meaning a glue is made that another substance is put on. So it could be diamond dust in the case of Andy Warhol. It could be ground rubber. If someone's doing it could be almost anything can be thrown in the wet ink. These are very tiny dots, so I'm not sure if flocking would have held up.
And what about, will ink on these prints have any special sensitivity to light?
No, they're fully hardened. It's what's interesting about this ultraviolet technology that I first used in the 90s with the master printer that I studied under, Jean-Yves Noblet at Noblet Serigraphy. He was one of the first to have this light cured ink, ultraviolet, and it was mind blowing to me. I'd never seen anything like it. It uses light to cure ink rather than heat, which is a traditional thing. Now it's a little bit more ubiquitous. They have, you can have your fingernails in, I've never been, had my fingernails done because they're always covered in ink. There's no point. But if one were to have their fingers done, they now have light cured ink for fingernails. The subway posters now, when you sort of touch them and they have sort of a plastic coating, those are inks that are dried with light, UV cured light for fillings on your teeth. So this has been a growing field in the last 20 years. So we're using that same technology. It's a light oven that the ink goes in wet one side and comes out completely dry seconds later. So what that allows us to do is to stack on top of each other and build up. And these are each of the stars in Victoria's print is small, and it has, so the lines are one layer, and then the tiniest stars are another layer stacked a couple times, and then the bigger stars are printed more with a heavier deposit.
How long did it take to do the whole process from start to finish?
A lot longer than we imagined originally. So what I would like for you to understand is that every single print each print that you pick up was handled 20 different times and had 20 different steps in it. So it took a solid nonstop week of all, and silkscreen is a very fast process. So for the entire edition, relative to other print processes, not fully mechanical processes, but so the black layer was printed first. That maybe took us an hour to print all of them, the first black layer. The white lines probably took us a day to print, and then the dots to the second set of dots probably took 2 days, and the third set of dots probably took 3 days for us to print as a team. And it's a large edition, so that was part of it. Was we all had to be involved to some degree.
Well, we print club members really appreciate it, because I think if you are a print person, it's really great to hear from the printer how, we can look at a beautiful image, but it's interesting to hear the process behind it.
This is special. This is a very special print, and I'm very proud of it. I like to be intrigued by the process. I like to invent things with artists. I've been printing for 23 years every day in New York City, and I love to explore the process. Victoria pushed the boundaries of what we could do, and it's subtle, and in its subtlety is the true mastery of Victoria's vision and the printers involved.
I think so. One final question about her print. So how many people did it take to work on it? You said that you were all working on it.
So there were. So I would say that everyone in the shop at some point had a role to play. Mm-hmm. Dennis and I were on it from the beginning, and then Leslie Duguid, John Bartolo, Chris Kinsler, Nellie Davis, and maybe Zaire Anderson and Dana. So that's how many printers were involved in this. We have a shop that so Powerhouse Arts print shop, we work with 65 to 85 artists a year. We do over 300 projects a year. And we have a very amazing team, and we all want to be involved in every project. So there were a lot of people involved in this project, and it's a small print, and it's your focus is just that much more when it's small. Mm-hmm. No mistake can go unchecked with a small work. A big work that's monumental, your eyes are going everywhere. You'll never see a tiny little speck of white ink that shouldn't be there.
Right. What paper was the base?
The base is a paper called Coventry Rag. It is one of our standard screen printing papers. Rag being 100% cotton, so it's naturally archival. Cotton is naturally archival. It is an ink that is, it is a paper that is a proprietary paper for Legion Paper, which is a New York-based paper company, one of the few remaining American art paper companies. This paper called Coventry Rag was originally invented by Legion for an artist named Erta, who did Art Deco embossed work. And it's been one of our standard papers in the print shop because it's very long grain paper, very durable, can withstand a lot of holding, and it's a stiff paper. So if you imagine picking up a paper and running it through a dryer 20 times and printing on it, we need a paper that's going to withstand all the holding. And
Right.
Coventry Rag does that.
Right.
It's a 335 gram paper, which is how you grams per square meter. That's what GSM is. So they actually weigh, at some point in the process, weigh a square meter or a meter of paper. And that's how much this paper would weigh.
Well, it's going to be, I think when people receive it next month, people are going to be very excited. And several of our members end up giving their prints to museums. And so Victoria Burge's
Wonderful.
work, which is already in several museums, this particular print will be gracing other museum collections. Now, thank you so much for taking time to explain about the print. And can you tell us a little bit what you're doing with Powerhouse Arts now? And in fact, what is Powerhouse Arts?
I would love to. So Powerhouse Arts is a nonprofit arts institution that's dedicated to preserving arts fabricator roles in New York City. We are, the project was started in 2015. We are building a 170,000 square foot facility on the Gowanus Canal, and the print shop will be moving in this time next year. And we'll have wood, metal, textile, print, and ceramics all in a 170,000 square foot facility that will have over 200 fabricators and people in training, trying to preserve the tradition of arts fabrication in New York City, which is a huge field. We have one of the largest artist populations in the world, and they all rely on special fabricators for many of the higher end processes. And as we know, the world is constantly changing. The real estate market in New York is king, and it's harder and harder to have facilities where artists and artisans can collaborate. So this will be dedicated to preserving that. So I'm the master printer director of Powerhouse Arts Print Shop, and we will have, hopefully next year, we'll have a independent studio where members can work on their own work, and the collaborative shop such as Victoria used. And also that model will be replicated in wood, metal, ceramics, and textile. I have had a very good fortune of working with hundreds of New York artists over the career. Previously to Powerhouse Arts, I was the director and master printer for Axel Editions. I was the founder of a publishing company called Fourth Estate that worked the EAB fair for over a decade. So I was manning a booth at this time every year. I also teach at Parsons School of Design. I teach printmaking there. And I really love the process. And what I'm excited about with Powerhouse Arts is that we get to work with the community and maybe certainly get a new generation of artists and artisans involved in print that maybe won't have a chance to go to art school and learn this, such as I did.
Well, I think it's really exciting, and I hope that maybe by this time next year you will set up a visit so that we Print Club members can come and see Powerhouse. I mean, to
Absolutely.
me, the idea of an art space that's 190,000 square feet is just.
Oh, it's going to be, and what's going to be great for printmaking is you'll have this true collaboration between metal, wood, ceramics, and textile. In my mind, print is not limited to the traditional intaglio, litho, silkscreen, relief, digital. In my mind, printmaking is anything in multitude. So if you can imagine having master crafts people in all these forms chiming in on, well, can we cut this paper in a CNC router, 120 inches long by 60 inches long? There's so many opportunities that are going to open up.
Well, we look forward to seeing what happens. And Luther, thank you again. Thank you for, with your team, making such a beautiful print for 2020.
I can hardly wait for you all to see it. And thank you so much for continuing what you've been doing this whole time. I think it's really important that we have spokespeople for print and the craft. I would not have a profession if it weren't for people who are interested in the result. So, you know, it all the end user being all of you, and your, you know, I can't say enough for your continued devotion to the craft.
Thank you. And everyone who joined us tonight, thank you so much. This is our first ever virtual event. I have a feeling it will not be our last. And I look forward to when the Zoom recording is recorded, it will be shared with everybody. And as Kim said, you can watch it again or send it on to people who might enjoy it. Thank you so much and good night.